Welcome back to Chaos Corner, here on Guardian of Chaos, the YouTube channel, for another episodic YouTube adventure on story time. It's me. It's the GOC. Much love and respect to everyone out there. Thanks for being here on this edition. One man, unique, unedited, unscripted, raw dog for you, the fans. We'll be doing this together for the very first time. Shout out to my moderators, Austin Nance, my brother from another mother, and of course, we acknowledge the OTS Tribal Queen. Sit back and relax, drop an elbow on that like button, share, subscribe, say something, do something. Surviving the territories. The early 1980s was an incredible fluid time for professional wrestling. Left and right, promoters were expanding and absorbing territories, while others were selling out and leaving the sport behind. One of the biggest changes to the business was actually a well-deserved retirement. On January 1st, 1982, Sam Muchnick stepped down from his leadership role in St. Louis. And although he'd remain around the local office for another year as an advisor, his days running the day-to-day operations were finished. His retirement was not only a loss to wrestling in St. Louis and to the National Wrestling Alliance, but to the business as a whole. He had been a wise advocate for peace, a sounding board for grievances, and the glue between various organizations. In an industry not always known for its integrity, Muchnick was trusted, and he was the shining star everyone looked to for guidance. For 37 years, Muchnick ran St. Louis with professionalism and class. The famous Wrestling at the Chase TV program was mandatory viewing for fans, and wrestlers who worked St. Louis always knew they were getting a fair shake. In terms of talent and booking angles, Muchnick was exceptionally conservative. Matches usually went to a conclusive finish, and he enjoyed promoting wrestlers of legitimate skill and strength. He was thrilled by gimmicks. Well, I should say he wasn't thrilled by gimmicks. Bear with me. Remember, the first time together. We're a team here on Chaos Corner. Nor was he impressed by egomaniacal personalities behind the scenes. Muchnick didn't give time for games, and he never wanted to risk disappointment to his patrons. After all, it's you, the fans, that makes us. Your hard-earned money. Your willingness to consume the product. If someone wanted to no-show a booking in St. Louis without proper advance notice, that was a wrestler was likely not to be welcomed again. As well it should be in this business, even today in 2024. Remember, as I always say, don't hate the player, hate the game. Because the players may change, but the game doesn't change. If I could teach you that, because when you come here, you walk into this show, because it's not a fucking podcast, to learn something. So that when you walk out of here and you leave viewing this, you are better for it and have more knowledge in the IWC with the GOC. Well, that's me. It was an admirable practice, and the St. Louis populace appreciated his extraordinary dedication. With heavy hearts, those same fans acknowledged and celebrated his great career upon his retirement. Wrestling went on, though, as does in life. And the St. Louis Wrestling Club, under the ownership of Bob Geigel, Pat O'Connor, and Vern Gagne, kept the territory alive. Larry Matzik, Muchnick's longtime assistant, was retained to manage the office, and the transition of ownership apparently was relatively painless. Of course, there was bound to be adjustments, mostly because of the new influence of Geigel in the territory. A former wrestler of note, Geigel was the head of the Central States region, headquartered in Kansas City, and in August 1982, he was elected to his third term as NWA president. Speaking of presidents, how about the election coming up pretty soon? Keep your head on a swivel. Use your discernment. Surround yourself with like-minded people. Stay with mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually fit. Because if he's for us, no one can be against us. Shout out to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And just to throw it in, because they said president of the NWA, man. You better know what you're doing unless you got your head up your ass of where this country's going. I mean, it's obvious who the choice is. And nothing may save this. The good old USA. Just my PSA for this edition of Storytime on Chaos Corner. The merging of ownership in St. Louis and Kansas City was going to streamline things a little too much for some tastes. Definite characteristic of Geigel's promotion were going to show up in St. Louis. And the purists like Matzik, the change would be difficult to accept. Kansas City relied on more gimmickry than St. Louis had under Mushnick. They popped houses for immediate returns rather than considering long-term effects. How about that? And used crooked finishes to incite crowd reaction. Matzik knew what made wrestling tick in his city and didn't understand changing a thriving system. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Several times in 1982, he butted heads with Geigel and even resigned only to return in the hopes of protecting the unique qualities of St. Louis. There was no city in wrestling like it. Too close? Too much? Too soon? I get it. I scare the rats off cheesecake. I make onions cry. I get it. They say the camera puts 10 pounds on you. It might have put 25 on me. Lighten up, man. Kayfabe. Kayfabe. Geigel possessed an entirely different mindset. Originally from Algona, Iowa, he served in World War II and enjoyed a successful run as a football player and wrestler at the University of Iowa. In 1948, his grappling skills earned him All-American honors, and 2 years later, he turned professional. Geigel toured the country but spent much of his time in his home territory of the Central States. He learned the promotional side of the business from George Simpson in Kansas City and Gus Karras in St. Joseph in 1963. He joined his mentors and Pat O'Connor to form Heart of America Sports Attractions Incorporated. The new company would become the principal entry behind wrestling in Iowa, Kansas, and western Missouri, a region with a tremendous history in wrestling. Iowa had been at the center of the sports focus during the first quarter of the 20th century, with Frank Gotch and Earl Caddick ruling the roost. Iowa was also the birthplace of the National Wrestling Alliance under the sensible leadership of Paul Pinky George. The NWA was formed in 1948, initially as a Midwestern outgrowth of his Des Moines-based organization of the same name. History fans, take out your notebooks. I hope you're writing it down. So when you go to your next barbecue or outing or event or co-workers or at the water cooler or the pub, a venue or restaurant, you know what the fuck you're talking about. And you could actually add something to the conversation. That's why you're here. Facts, not viewpoints and opinions. Truth, reality. You having a good day? Because I know that I am. What? Okay, where were we? Paul Pinky George. You know what they say? They're stinking the pink. I don't know what they're talking about when they say that to kids today. I don't know. But the NWA quickly grew beyond Pinky's control, and by the early 60s, George found himself at odds with the Alliance. Even though he was the father of the organization, he was essentially muscled out of the business by the politically strong Heart of America Sports Attractions. And you see that this AI bitch who I have heat with, every episode down here, I'm going at it with this female AI. You know I got heat with her, right? Stand by. Alexa, bitch, Play Tropical Thunderstorm sounds. She's finally listening to me. I think I got her right where I want her. The company did the same to Orville Brown, the very first NWA World Heavyweight Champion, who owned a slice of the Kansas City office for years. As Geigel's group consolidated power, Brown was pushed into retirement. Without competition, the Kansas City office controlled the territory, and Geigel strengthened his standing in the NWA, becoming a member of the board of directors in 1972, an officer in 1977, and president in 1978. There was little doubt Geigel was greatly respected by his peers and wrestlers alike. He was a college-educated guy and a veteran of thousands of matches. On extended tours of West Texas, he picked up a lot of knowledge about booking and creativity from Dory Funk Sr. and implemented many of those tricks of the trade in the Central States. Having New Zealander Pat O'Connor around was a big help as well. The former NWA World Champion from 1959 to 1961 aided with booking, worked matches, and acted as the middleman between Kansas City and St. Louis, where he owned a percentage and also worked as a matchmaker. How different the industry was then as compared to now. Am I right? Just by learning the history and reading along with me and reviewing and understanding what the fuck I'm talking about? How different. This is what I love presenting to you, the fans. It's my way of giving back, my motivation and passion since the late 60s. You guys know my background. Go up to the top of the banner page here and read what I'm all about. Navigate the playlist of 3,500 videos here on the channel in 4 years. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Let that marinate. Let that sink in, man. Okay, where were we? West Texas, Dory Funk Sr. There was another major player in the Central States, and he was arguably the most valuable. Harley Race, a brilliant grappler from Quitman, Missouri. Race by 1982 was already a 6-time NWA World Heavyweight title holder, an important box office attraction around the globe. A product of the territory, he was celebrated in towns large and small, and both Geigel and Mushnick supported his numerous title reigns. He was a multifaceted performer, able to wrestle or fight at a moment's notice, and was the perfect opponent for any number of foes. It didn't matter if it were Andre the Giant or a scientific grappler like Jack Briscoe. Race was an ideal ring rival. And beginning in 1982, he also owned stock in St. Louis and the office. The combination of Geigel's position in the NWA and Race's value as a grappler gave the Central States Missouri contingent enormous power. Jim Crockett Jr., head of the Mid-Atlantic Territory, was another well-situated member of the alliance, and his star grappler, Nature Boy Ric Flair. Woo! Haven't said that in a while. Woo! That feels pretty good. Oh, woo! What? Was the organization's heavyweight champion. The Crockett's were part of wrestling tradition in the Carolinas and Virginia, going back decades. Jim Sr. actually began in the promotional business in the 1930s and joined the NWA in 1951. He developed a thriving region, utilizing the best talent in the business, and earned the respect of both wrestlers and fans. Enthusiasts appreciated the consistency of his first-class presentation, and grapplers were never cheated by his payoffs. He was sincere, loyal to the community, and widely appreciated in big cities and small. His death in 1973 was a stunning blow to the wrestling world at large, and his friends within the NWA mourned the loss of a veteran leader and colleague. The Mid-Atlantic promotion was inherited by his family, with Jim Crockett Jr. taking control, central control, with a central role. During the last half of the 1970s, under the watchful eye of Booker George Scott, Jim Crockett Promotions, JCP, evolved as an organization and really became one of the crown jewel territories for the NWA, featuring outstanding talent as aforementioned Ric Flair. Woo! I did it again. Woo! Ricky Steamboat, Roddy Piper, Greg Valentine, and Paul Jones. JCP was riding an impressive high, and Jim Crockett Jr. was lauded for his leadership. His political position inside the alliance grew, first as a second vice president in 1976, and then as president beginning in 1980. This 37-year-old Crockett sponsored Flair for the NWA title, and on September 17th, 1981, in Kansas City, the Nature Boy went over Dusty Rhodes for his first world championship. Write it down. September 17th, 1981, Ric Flair's first world championship for the NWA over the American Dream Dusty Rhodes. The first. That's why you're here. You learned shit. Crockett was reselected and reelected NWA president in 1981, but didn't seek the position. How about that? The following year, in fact, he didn't attend the 1982 annual meeting in San Juan, Puerto Rico. No me jodas, maricón, muévete, culo, mendeo. No offense, man, they nada. What I say for my Spanish-speaking friends out there. I'm bilingual. I speak like 5 languages. At least a little of each. Baby, come on, man. That's why I say that whether you're a wrestling manager, a talent, a wrestler, whatever it is you do in this industry and in life, wear several hats. Be valuable instead of just putting all your eggs in one basket. I'm just saying. That's life wisdom. His brother David represented the promotion, that's David Crockett, at the convention. Bob Geigel became president. Within the political hierarchy of the NWA, egos ran rampant and volatility was often the norm. The loss of the even-tempered Sam Mushnick had hurt the coalition. But a new generation of leaders stepped up, and Crockett's voice at the table was vitally important. Another key leader was Eddie Graham of Tampa, Florida. Born Edward Gossett in Chattanooga, Tennessee, he became one half of the renowned Graham Brothers tag team along with Dr. Jerry Graham. Their villainous act was a showstopper all over the wrestling map, and they turned crowds on their heads from the moment they stepped through the backstage curtain. In Florida, Eddie branched out on his own, wrestling for his original trainer, Clarence Cowboy Luttrell. Google it. No, don't go Google it. Duck, go it. Fuck Google. Wait, did I say that? Fuck it. Remembered for his ill-fated boxer versus wrestling bout against legendary fighter Jack Dempsey, which resulted in a knockout for the latter, Luttrell is credited with creating the first viable wrestling circuit in Florida. His territory extended from Tallahassee to Key West, and Graham was a major box office draw. Surprisingly, Graham was a better fan favorite in Florida than a heel. And his ring wars with the great Malenko and Johnny Valentine are still talked about today. Following Luttrell's retirement in 1970, Graham assumed control over the region and became a member of the NWA Board of Directors around 1971. 5 years later, in August of 76, he was elected NWA president, replacing Fritz von Erich, a.k.a. Jack Atkinson. Graham was an extraordinary promoter, and his love for the business was nearly unparalleled. He had a special affinity for pure wrestling, even in the worked professional environment. That meant he enjoyed booking shooters, and he had a great respect for amateur grappling. Graham donated a significant amount of money to area wrestling institutions, including the University of Florida in Gainesville, and endlessly supported local charities and events. He established a youth camp and was influential in the lives of thousands of young people. Pretty impressive what Graham did do as opposed to what he didn't do. Very controversial figure, a very famous figure, Eddie Graham. Wrestler Steve Kern told the Lakeland Ledger in 1976 that Graham was hugely important in his development. Seeing that I never had a father around, Eddie sort of took over and straightened me out on things, Kern explained. He discouraged me against fighting and kept me out of a few fights. He basically showed me how to defend myself and how easily I could be hurt in a fight. Graham was also a man of great principle. And after a newspaper heavily criticized a wrestling show in St. Petersburg in 1972, he swiftly pulled all future events from the city's Bayfront Auditorium. The reason, according to the St. Petersburg Evening Independent, was that he'd happily forfeit tens of thousands of dollars rather than risk adverse publicity for wrestling. How about that for protecting the sport? My files are full of letters from mayors, teachers, sheriffs asking us to help in putting on programs in schools. To quote Eddie Graham, we want to keep doing that. But when things like that article come out, we may become ineffective because even the kids will start doubting us, to quote Eddie Graham. Florida wrestling epitomized action and matches between Jack Briscoe and Dusty Rhodes, and Dory Funk Jr. established a high bar for scientific wrestling seen anywhere in the world, especially Briscoe and Funk. But that's the way Graham liked it. He featured top wrestlers, brawlers, and colorful performers, and the mixture gave the Sunshine State incredible in-ring flavor. And the warm weather made Florida a hotbed for big-name talent during the winter months. In March 1978, Graham resigned as president of the NWA due to health problems. But he retained his influence and was a vocal supporter behind the world title reigns of Dusty Rhodes in 1979 and 1981. Another member of the NWA board of directors in 81 and 82 was Ron Fuller. A man with wrestling deep in his blood. Standing 6'9", he was a third-generation wrestler who followed in the footsteps of his grandfather, Roy Welch, and father, Buddy Fuller. He was a multiple-time regional champion, winning titles in Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida, and assumed control in the Knoxville promotion around 1974. In January of 78, it was announced that Fuller had acquired the Gulf Coast wrestling business from Lee Fields, effectively widening his scope of operations. His Southeastern wrestling promotion was responsible for Alabama and Northwestern Florida after selling out of Knoxville. He moved his home office to Gulf Breeze, Florida. During the early 80s, Fuller's company was on fire, and a combination of captivating angles, star wrestlers, and well-booked matches sparked attendance all over the territory. Fuller's grandfather, Roy Welch, began his wrestling career around 1930 and was followed into the sport by three of his brothers, Herb, Jack, and Lester Welch. He teamed with Nick Gulas and established a Nashville office during the 1940s. Wow, we're going back in the time machine. In 1949, they joined the NWA and franchised the territory. Now, how about that? Me. That included parts of Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, and Mississippi, with further extensions into Arkansas, Missouri, and Indiana. For more than 30 years, Welch and Gulas worked in a partnership controlling the infamous gasoline circuit and exerted strong influence in the alliance. But in 1977, after what the Tennessean called internal management difficulties, the territory was fractured, with Welch and Jerry Jarrett on one side and Gulas on the other. A handful of months later, in September 1977, Welch passed away. At the time of the separation, the 34-year-old Jarrett took control of the predominant stars in the region and challenged Gulas head-to-head throughout the territory. Memphis was ground zero for the war, and Gulas was handicapped for the beginning after losing his TV outlet. Jarrett capitalized with his own studio television program and seized the Mid-South Coliseum for his shows. The legendary Mid-South Coliseum, wow, established his local dominance. The war continued elsewhere, but in the eyes of the NWA, both Jarrett and Gulas were members and were accorded the rights of the organization. But Jarrett was exploring his options, and strengthened his ties to Vern Gagne's AWA. Once again, politics in pro wrestling rearing its ugly head as it does currently here in 2024, back to 2020, 2016, and especially before that. You know what I'm talking about, right? Research it. I don't have to do all the work for you, do I? He also acknowledged the Continental Wrestling Association, a sanctioned body, and recognized a local world champion between 1979 and 1981. Billy Graham, Dory Funk Jr., and Billy Robinson were among those to hold the CWA world title during that time period. Jerry Lawler, the king of wrestling in Memphis, was another CWA title holder, and over the course of his career, held more than 160 championships. His legendary status in and around the Mid-Southern Territory was undisputed. In 1982, I remember this like yesterday, he garnered national attention with a feud with comedian actor Andy Kaufman, who played Latka Gravis on the hit sitcom Taxi. Kaufman was known for interjecting a large dose of psychology into his comedy, and was drawing the ire of fans by participating in intergender bouts. Lawler was not pleased with Kaufman's off-color shenanigans, and things took a serious turn in April of 1982, when Lawler put Kaufman in the hospital with a neck injury after a bout in Memphis. A few months later, on July 28th, the two appeared on Late Night with David Letterman. That was a great show in the 80s. Where Lawler slapped and then bitch slapped Kaufman, only to receive a cup of hot coffee to the face in return. The angle developed perfectly and had everyone talking. All the way across the country in Northern California, pro wrestling experienced a series of changes between 79 and 82. That established promoter, Roy Shire, an ex-grappler from Hammond, Indiana. Just a quick story about Hammond, Indiana, and yours truly. I had a chance to manage and work against the legendary Terry Funk in the Hammond, Indiana Civic Center for the WWZ World Wrestling Zone. That's right, yours truly and Terry Funk as I managed Tommy Capone. What a match. And I took that left taped fist right between the eyes and several chair shots to the head by the unbelievable Funk. I was honored and privileged, though. And Funk is from Hammond, Indiana. So how about tying all that up for history and why you're actually here and who the fuck I was? Humble, blessed, and fortunate. I'll say that to say this, because I tell it like it is. He drove attendance upwards with solid booking and impeccable performers, and his annual Battle Royal at the Cow Palace was a must-see event in the late 60s and 1970s. He joined the NWA in 1968 and was named to the board of directors the following year. In 1971, he also had a stint as second vice president, and with strong friendships, it was all but guaranteed that the alliance would come to his aid if needed. Shire did eventually need major support. In 1979, he collapsed in his booking office and began relying on outside talent, pulling in grapplers from Mike LaBelle, Bob Geigel, and later Eddie Graham in Florida. Wow, history. Getting chill. Look, like The Rock does. Goosebumps, can you see him? But the out-of-town TV productions, specifically those provided by Geigel from Kansas City, were not in line with what San Francisco fans expected, and Shire's business further suffered. On January 24th, 1981, Shire ran his final program at the Cow Palace with Dusty Rhodes, the Funk Brothers, and Pat Patterson on the bill. And his 20-year run in San Francisco came to an end. But the Bay Area was never void of big-time wrestling. 9 days before Shire boarded up his enterprise, Vern Gagne's AWA debuted at the Oakland Coliseum Arena with a stacked card. With local TV already in place, Gagne meant business. And by mid-1982, he'd moved into the Cow Palace and successfully absorbed the territory. Up the coast in Portland, Don Owen was the boss of the Pacific Northwest Territory, a prosperous area that encompassed most of Oregon and Washington. Having begun his tenure as a promoter and as an understudy of his father, Herb, during the 1930s, he took over following the latter's death in 1942. Owen was a promoter of the Sam Mushnick type, unflinchingly fair to his talent, and possessing a code of ethics rare in wrestling circles. The Pacific Northwest was capably run for decades without shady dealings, and Owen was greatly respected within the NWA, serving on the board of directors several times. His membership card in the Alliance was issued in 1951, making him one of the longest reigning associates. And by the 1980s, he was fast approaching his 50th anniversary in the business. His range of knowledge and experience made him a valuable cog in the national organization. That's right, I said cog. It's better than being an insignificant cog in the wheel of life, don't you think? Wrestling at the Portland Sports Arena offered an addictive blend of athleticism and vibrant drama. And Owen never lacked top-name talent. Luther Lindsay, Stan Stasiak, Maurice Mad Dog Vachon, Moondog Mayne, and Dutch Savage were always reliable draws, and a young, rowdy Roddy Piper was heavily influenced during his time in Portland. That's right, the Hot Rod. Loyal viewers of Owen's innovative television program on KPTV, featuring memorable commercials by sponsor Tom Peterson, saw the development of exciting angles and religiously packed the arena to see the culmination of intense feuds. Regional champions and visits by the touring NWA world title holders added box office appeal, and crowds usually popped when a national attraction visited the town. Altogether, with stable TV and a good crop of grapplers, Owen insulated himself from the pitfalls that had taken down San Francisco, Tulsa, and other regional NWA territories. You guys know my history. I worked for about a half dozen different NWA territories just a little bit later in the 90s. And when they even broke up into the late 90s. Had a lot of fun in those NWA territories. New England, New Jersey, New York, down south. I mean, it really was good stuff, the NWA territories. Especially here in the greater tri-state New England Northeast area. It was thriving. Really was. Don't forget, some very influential people, from Howard Brody to Dennis Corluzzo, to the Sparta brothers, to Michael Bryan, to now Paul Roma and Mario Mancini, and everybody in between. Including the NAWA. That's right, I'll say it, the NAWA. Another Oregonian, Tex Hager, also held membership in the NWA during the 1950s and booked the territory that included Idaho, Utah, and Washington. After he folded around 1959, his cities were divvied up by several enterprising promoters. The same went for Dave Reynolds, who controlled Salt Lake City and towns in both Wyoming and Colorado for a time. Outside of the stability Owen brought through his Portland booking office, most of these western states were loosely operated, and I use loosely, and figured into the territories of various promoters throughout the years, obviously. Dean Silverstone's Superstar Championship Wrestling picked up a number of vacant towns, Seattle and Tacoma among them, in the late 60s, and ran as an independent outfit for about a decade. Many other cities were left without big-time wrestling. Travel was part of the problem, as good drawing towns were too far for wrestlers to make any money. And the weather conditions during winter months were brutal. Wow! Salt Lake City was abandoned essentially because of its location. The closest major city regularly engaged in a prospering circuit was Denver, more than 500 miles away by car. Sporadically, indie promoters tried to make money in the region, such as when Eric the Great, Toma Red Cloud, Judy Grable, and Rod O'Neal appeared at the State Fairgrounds Coliseum in the summer of 1979. But on the whole, Utah was mostly without wrestling until April 8th, 1982, when the AWA, as part of its western expansion, claimed Salt Lake City. An enthusiastic crowd of 7,000 people turned out to see former BYU hero Ken Patera and many other TV stars. And what was the renaissance of pro grappling in the region? Sports writer Lee Benson of the Denver News, the Desert News, probably the same thing, remembered the old time wrestling of the 60s. And after seeing the AWA show, noted the years haven't changed the act. Hence my quote of, don't hate the player, hate the game. The faces and names change, but the game doesn't. And that was a major selling point for fans. North of Portland, Vancouver, British Columbia enjoyed more than a half century of remarkable wrestling history. Legends Frank Gotch, Stanislaus Zbyszko, Dan McLeod, and Ted Thigh made appearances there, going back to the early 1900s, here in the Time Machine. And the sport maintained a terrific popularity throughout the region. Cliff Parker, around the time of the NWA's formation in 41, stabilized Vancouver as an affiliate, with booking ties to Don Owen in Portland and Stu Hart in Calgary. Interested in protecting the reputation of pro wrestling, Parker issued a challenge to the local populace in 1954, claiming that a wrestler could easily demonstrate his favorite or any hold on a doubting fan to prove the sport's legitimacy. It isn't known how many people actually took him up on the offer, but Parker got his point across. It took Rod Fenton, recently an NWA member in Arizona, as a partner in the late 50s, and in 1968 sold to Sandor Kovacs and Gene Kiniski. He took Rod Fenton, recently an NWA member in Arizona, as a partner, as I just said. Kiniski, the NWA World Champion from 1966 and 69, was originally from Edmonton, but made Vancouver his home. And he drew sizable audiences as the defending champ. His witty interviews, villainous tactics, and impressive wrestling abilities were on display against fan favorites and heels alike. And Kiniski never failed to deliver. Multiple-time world championship claimant Don Leo Jonathan was also a big star across British Columbia. The 6'6", 300-pound behemoth won the local singles and tag team titles on numerous occasions. In 1977, Kovacs sold his shares of the territory to Al Tomko, who had previously promoted in Winnipeg as an affiliate for the AWA. Are you guys getting all this? Are you writing all this down? Am I giving it to you too fast? Tomko implemented a different formula for his promotion, booking himself as the champion, and as a result, the once thriving region began to suffer at the box office. Fans that knew the difference between the old style of grappling in Vancouver and Tomko's efforts were disappointed by the transformation and began to look elsewhere for their wrestling fix. Many people gravitated towards Stu Hart's Stampede promotion, which by 1983 was running shows in Vancouver at the PNE Agrodome. Say that 3 times fast. Hart was a legend in the business, first as a wrestler, then as the owner of the Foothills Athletic Club in Calgary, Alberta. Beginning in 1952, the Calgary promotion was highly successful, and Hart was well respected as a trainer. The basement of his home, known as the Dungeon, is where he taught his pupils the art of submission grappling. And his graduates were not only skilled performers, but capable shooters. Among his notable students were Fritz von Erich, superstar Billy Graham, and Wilbur Snyder. He also mentored his sons, Brett, Bruce, Smith, Keith, and Owen Hart. Each followed Stu's career path into the squared circle, with a heavy influence of Hart family grappling talent, along with upstarts Davey Boy Smith, Bad News Allen, and Honky Tonk Wayne the Honky Tonk Man Ferris. Wrestling under the Stampede banner flourished. On the other side of Canada, in the Maritimes, another family ruled the roost. They were the Cormier brothers, better known by their wrestling names Rudy and Bobby Kay, Leo Burke, and the Beast. In 1969, Rudy established the Eastern Sports Association and the promotion International Wrestling. Al Zink, his business partner, became the promoter of record, and the celebrated quartet of siblings maintained active careers. Burke was arguably the most popular, and he held the North American Championship 6 times. Let that marinate. He also was a strong regional challenger to world champions Terry Funk and Jack Briscoe. International wrestling closed up around 1979, and Emile Dupree's Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling took over the territory. Burke was also a star for Dupree, capturing the local U.S. title 3 times. with programs at the Halifax Forum and the Jean-Louis Levesque Arena in Moncton and Truro Stadium in central Nova Scotia. AGPW kept fans entertained in the Maritime Territory in the early 1980s. When considering the Canadian territories, one would be remiss not to place a rather large spotlight on Montreal and its tremendous wrestling history. The city and its surrounding region in Quebec was the proud home of pro grappling for generations, spawning legends like Emile Malpois, Eugene Tremblay, Henry DeGlane, and Yvon Robert. Promoter Eddie Quinn was in charge of the region when the Montreal territory was officially recognized by the NWA in 1949. Following Quinn's unceremonious exit from wrestling in 1963, Montreal was taken over by Johnny Rougeau and his International Wrestling Association. During the early 70s, the famous Vachon brothers, Maurice and Paul, opened Grand Prix Wrestling, offering a second brand for area fans. Wrestling in Montreal was incredibly robust. I love that word, robust. The lineups included a young Andre the Giant, Killer Kowalski, Don Leo Jonathan, Edouard Carpentier, and of course the Vachons themselves. By the late 1970s, both promotions closed, and pro wrestling in Montreal saw a gigantic turnaround in popularity. In 1980, through Gino Brito, Frank Valos, and Andre the Giant formed Varusik Promotions, launching their own incarnation of international wrestling. And despite being an indie group, they featured a deep roster of talent. I always tell you about the indies. From the 40s and 50s and 70s and 90s into the 21st century here in 2024 as well, are the backbone of this fucking business and always have been. The independent promotions. Just remember that. I say it all the time. Support independent pro wrestling. You want to get a better feel for the business? Find the independents in your area and show up and check it out. Some of it's garbage, some of it's outlaw, some of it's mud show, and some of it is fantastic. And despite being an indie group, they featured a deep roster of talent. Andre's ties to the WWF allowed New York wrestlers to appear with regularity, and WWF champion Bob Backlund was among those to wrestle in Montreal. In 1982, Brito and his partners returned wrestling to the Montreal Forum, the city's top indoor venue, after several years of absence. It was a major score for international wrestling, and the promotion locked in a deal, ensuring they would control the Forum exclusively going forward. That's why I referenced earlier, and I'll reference it again, AEW, All In, the original 10,000-seat stadium, Chicago, Independent, so on, and now what it is. It's been done before many, many times, as you see here. And you learn here. Learning tree, my ass. Learn here. Another territory with rich heritage was Puerto Rico, which was part of the Caribbean extension of Championship Wrestling from Florida for years. Excuse me. In 1973, Carlos Colon and Victor Jovica founded Capital Sports Promotions and joined the NWA 6 years later. The promotion ran operations in San Juan, Bayamon, Caguas, Ponce, and many other towns, and featured a host of internationally known stars. The regional North American Championship was held by Bruno Sammartino, Gorilla Monsoon, Mr. Fuji, and Abdullah the Butcher, among others. Colon, an enormously popular performer, won it 8 times. In July 1982, Abdullah claimed to be the heavyweight champion of the world, but was quickly dethroned by Colon on July 24th. With exciting athletes and rowdy brawls, Puerto Rico was the stage for intense grappling action, and local fans were hooked in the most dangerous territory perhaps in the world. Lastly, nearly 6,000 miles away from San Juan, Hawaii, developed under the leadership of Alex Karasik during the 1930s. Like Florida and Puerto Rico, Hawaii was a prime destination for wrestlers because of its beauty and weather. In addition, for wrestlers venturing overseas to Japan, Honolulu was the perfect midway spot to earn extra money. Karasik worked with partners in Japan, and those connections continued under his successors, Ed Francis and Lord James Blair's Tally-Ho Mid-Pacific Promotions beginning in 1961. Steve Ricard ultimately bought the promotion in 1979 and soon had a falling out with well-known grappler, the High Paramount Samoan Chief, Peter Maivia, who started up his own company, Polynesian Pro Wrestling. Ricard returned to New Zealand, and Maivia built a highly profitable operation. On June 12, 1982, the 45-year-old Maivia passed away, and his wife, Leah Maivia, Booker Lars Anderson, continued the promotion's success. If you pull back even further, which I will do right now, and look at wrestling on a global scale, Japan, Mexico, the United Kingdom, Australia, South Africa, and many other countries feature some level of big-time professional wrestling. Organizations were well defined in those locations, offering their own heroes and popular feuds to excite and grow the fan base. By the end of 1982, the belief that the sport was indeed in some kind of decline was hard to imagine. Remember, at that time, I'm 20 years old. Wow. And wow spelled backwards is wow. Well over a dozen booking offices in the United States were doing pretty good business. And although daring promoters were looking at expansion, the NWA continued to protect the integrity of the territories. But in 1983, we would see a change for pro wrestling. And there was nothing the NWA, with all of its, how do I say this, finely crafted bylaws, could do to stop one enterprising promoter from taking on the world. 1983. We'll continue, and we'll be back here on Storytime on Guardian of Chaos, the YouTube channel. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. Drop an elbow on that like button. Come on back, there's more content coming. And we'll forge on into a new era in professional wrestling. I'll say that to say this. Because I tell it like it is. Don't you dare miss it.